He stepped out of the dusk like a punctuation I never expected. The son I'd argued with. The boy who slammed doors and left. The man I had imagined 1,000 different ways. He stopped my car on a narrow country road and said 3 sentences that folded my past and present into one afternoon. If you stay with me through this chapter, you'll hear the echo of his voice that still lives in my chest. Before I begin, tell me, from which cities are you watching us tonight? Drop a name in the chat. I love picturing faces and places when I tell this. I remember that evening by its small details first, the low sun staining the fields the color of old coins, the faint smell of rain that hadn't decided whether to fall, the way the radio hummed quietly, an old ballet my mother used to hum when she thought I wasn't listening. I was 49, wearing the same faded scarf I'd had for years. Hands warmed on the steering wheel of a car that had seen more good miles than bad. I was humming alone to a song about a road that went on forever when I saw him. A figure half in shadow, thumb out, standing where a long gravel shoulder met the asphalt. For a beat, my brain supplied polite, ordinary possibilities. A stranded traveler, a student, a hitch shaker in need. Then the voice cut through. Mom. 2 syllables that are small and enormous at once. My name is a shock. It was Marcus. He looked older than the last photograph I'd kept in a shoebox. Older in a way that makes you measure the space between the years and feel it. He had a jacket that had been mended at the elbow, a backpack slung like an apology, and his hair was a little longer than I remembered. When he smiled, something in me recognized the exact tilt of his mouth, the tiny scar on his left cheek from a bike accident when he was 7. Recognition roared louder than my fear. I parked. I remember thinking about all the things movies make us expect in moments like these. Dramatic words, raised voices, a history replaying itself in 2 minutes. What actually unfolded was quieter, and that made it sharper. He climbed into the passenger seat with the careful, almost embarrassed ease of someone who had rehearsed his entrance, and then realized rehearsal had no power here. You're early for the storm, I said. Because my voice needs small practical scaffolding. He laughed, a sound that had been strained in our last years together. But that evening came easy. I couldn't stay away, he said simply. The sentence landed with the weight of something reclaimed. It was not an explanation. It was an admission, and that made it more honest. We drove without television talk for a few miles, the kind of silence that's not empty, but living, heavy with unsaid things. He watched the lines of the road like he was learning them for the first time, and then, as if choosing a place to land, said, I wanted to see you before I moved on. Moved on? I asked. The road slid past with its long, patient trees. Moved on, he repeated. Not away from you. Towards something different. He folded his hands in his lap as if keeping them anchored. Mom, I want to tell you something important, but first, can I ask you something? Anything. Did you ever think about leaving? His question surprised me. He looked small asking it, but earnest in a way that made me hold my breath. I realized then that we were both dredging up the same map of our history, only from opposite shores. I thought of the nights I stayed up worrying, the arguments that had knocked pictures crooked on the walls, the day he slammed the door and didn't come back for a long time. I thought also of the stubbornness that had been mine, the kind that sometimes looks like holding on and sometimes looks like refusing to see another person's need. No, I said, and the truth tasted honest. I thought about it sometimes, but not really. I stayed because I thought staying was a way to fix things. He nodded like a student who has just heard the wrong answer, and then discovers why it was wrong. I thought about leaving a lot, he said, but not to punish you. I left because I needed to learn how to be my own person. I should have told you that. I should have come home more. I'm sorry. The apology hung between us and did something slow and quiet. It began to unstick old resentment. We both had the same clumsy tools, apologies, explanations, the small sacrament of acknowledging fault, but wrapping them up and handing them over was different than shoving them in a drawer for later. That day the drawer stayed open. We pulled off at a little diner that smelled of coffee and burnt toast. There were vinyl booths and a waitress who moved at the speed of someone who had watched a lot of life and felt little that surprised her. Marcus ordered black coffee and a chopped salad. I ordered eggs because I always ordered eggs when nerves made me forget what would taste right. The conversation when it came back moved like a river widening at its mouth. Easier, slower, full of small life. He told me about the years I had missed in details that were neither triumphant nor tragic. Odd jobs that taught him the dignity of labor. A tiny apartment with an upstairs neighbor who played the saxophone badly at midnight. An old dog he had loved for a while and buried under a maple. He didn't tell me everything. He left wide spaces where the hard years might have been, and I didn't press. There is a respect in being given pain to carry alone, and also a tenderness when someone chooses to share a piece of it. When he finally reached the thing he had come to say, his voice smoothed, and the rhythm of the diner cups around us felt like an audience that had been asked to be quiet. "Mom," he said, and that timbre made the word feel like a bridge. "I stopped because I wanted you to know I am trying. I'm trying to be a man I can respect, and part of that is being honest with you. Are you happy?" The question spilled out of me more quickly than I intended. It was selfish and hopeful at once. He looked out the window at the lane where my car was parked, at the sky nudging itself toward night. "Happiness is messy," he said, "but I'm finding it. I have a job I care about. I volunteer with a group that helps men coming out of jail find work. Sounds small, but it matters to me. I learned to listen to people who don't have anyone listening." He turned his face back to me, and I recognized the kind of pride I had once felt in him. Not the loud kind, but the steady, surprised kind you feel when the person you raised becomes unexpectedly generous. What followed wasn't a single cinematic confession, but a string of small truths that, when strung together, made something large. He told me that he had read some of my old letters to him, things I had never meant as sermons, but as my clumsy attempt to guide, and that those notes had made him think long nights. He said, "You kept better care of us than you gave yourself credit for." I saw that later. Hearing that felt like warmth moving through me. It wasn't an absolution. Life is rarely so tidy, but it was recognition, and I act with gratitude. We talked about his father in the way two people who have both lost someone negotiate memory. Careful, a little evasive, tender. Marcus admitted that the blame he'd carried for years had shaped many of his decisions, and that releasing it had been part of learning to be kinder to himself. At some point the rain finally decided to fall, soft at first, and then with more insistence. We ate, spoke, and then lingered like two people who had been given extra time. His hands, when he gestured, were the same large, warm tools that used to tie shoelaces and flip pancakes. There was a moment, brief and full, when I noticed his knuckles, the pale crescent where work had rubbed them, and I felt a fierce protective tenderness that is odd to recognize for a grown man. The feeling was simple, that he had been and would always be my child, and that the chapters we had both written had changed the stories we carried. As dusk folded the diner into a darker palette, he handed me a small envelope, the kind that had once held birthday cards. I had almost laughed at the ordinariness of it. Inside was a photograph him a few months older sitting with a toddler on his knee. A little boy with his father's stubborn chin and eyes that clearly belonged to his grandfather. There was also a short note, careful and unhurried. "Read it," he said. I did. The letter was not a performance. It was a map of his gratitude, his apologies, the lessons he had learned, and a request as soft as a hand on the back of a chair. "Will you be in our lives again? I don't need you to fix me. I need you to sit with me when I am tired. I need you to tell stories about the past, so the little one knows where he came from." His words rippled in me like a small miraculous tide. The little boy in the photo looked like a sunlit promise. I realized that the surprise on the road had not been just his appearance. It had been his reaching back across a decade with the request to reconnect, to fold our lives together with new edges. It was not a demand for forgiveness. It was a desire for partnership, mutual, respectful, careful. We drove back slowly, rain making the world glow in wet light. Marcus talked more about the volunteer program, about plans to rent a bigger place, about how he wanted his child to grow up knowing his family. He asked me practical questions: if I could come to a small birthday in spring, whether I liked coffee or tea more. Those everyday details steadied me. They were a scaffolding of a relationship I had missed without always admitting it. Before he left that night, standing in the glow of the car's dome light, we did something I hadn't known I needed. We made a plan. Simple, ordinary, and perfect in its smallness. He would call the next week. We would meet at the park near his apartment. He would bring the little boy. I would bring an old storybook he used to love. No grand promises, no vows to remake the past, just a commitment to be present, to show up. We shook hands, then hugged. The hug wasn't awkward or theatrical. It was long enough to mean the same as an unspoken vow. His last words as he walked away into the wet night were soft and steady. "Thank you, Mom," he said, "for staying open." Those words settled into me like seeds into soil. I didn't know then how often I'd play them back, the cadence, the tenderness. They became a small litany I whispered to myself on lonely mornings and loud ones alike. Driving home, the road felt different, not because it had changed but because I had. The map of my life had acquired a new route, one that went back through places I had been afraid to revisit and forward into small, careful hopes. His voice echoed, not as an accusation or a wound, but as an invitation. I kept thinking of that photograph in my glove compartment, a boy on a man's knee, an ordinary domestic miracle, a life that had made sense of absence by building something gentle. There were moments after that evening, of course, awkward phone calls, meals that needed relearning, conversations about discipline, and about how to tell a story to a child. None of it was easy and some of it hurt. But the big thing had happened on that rain road. He had come back, not to demand the past be undone, but to write a new one with me in it. His words, the simple, unadorned sentences of apology, gratitude, and request, still echo in my soul because they turned what I had been carrying into something I could hold between two hands and pass along. By the time I pulled into my driveway, night was full and forgiving. My house smelled like lemon cleaner and a life lived in many small routines. I put the envelope with the photograph in the top drawer of my bedside table and sat for a long time with the radio playing faintly. The echo of his voice stayed with me through the night. It convinced me that surprises aren't always shocks. Sometimes they're gateways. Sometimes the person who leaves returns with a map, and the surprise is simply discovery of who they've become and who you still are to them. I don't have all the answers. I don't pretend that one night closes 10 years. But I do know this. When someone you love chooses to return and speaks from the place they fought to become, it is an act of courage and of respect. I saw that courage in my son that night, and the respect in the way he asked me to be part of his future rather than trying to rewrite our past. That for me was the turning, and it still echoes. I kept the photograph on my nightstand where the first light of morning would catch the toddler's sunlit hair and Marcus' easy smile. It became a quiet ritual, this noticing, not a boast or a brag, but a daily reminder that connection can be restored even after long stretches of silence. I poured coffee into my favorite mug, feeling the steam rise and thinking about the road that had carried him back to me. The memory was vivid enough that I could smelt the rain, see the wet fields, and hear the faint scratch of his voice over the diner's chatter. That evening hadn't been a climax in the way novels promise. It was the hinge of something slow, something patient, something real. I started calling him a few days later, testing the waters of our renewed relationship. The first call was tentative, our voices finding a rhythm that didn't exist for a decade. "Hi, Mom," he said simply. That simplicity carried the weight of unspoken apologies, of nights spent apart wondering if we would ever talk like this again. "Hi, Marcus," I replied, and the warmth in my own voice surprised me. We spoke about trivialities first, the scaffolding of reconnection, what he was cooking for dinner, whether I had seen the new series on television, what the weather was like in his neighborhood. Then gradually we moved to the stories that had lingered unshared. He told me about the man he had been trying to become, about the guilt he had carried for leaving, and about the small victories that had made him proud. I listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just holding the space for him to speak. One Saturday morning we decided to meet at the park near his apartment. I wore a scarf against the crisp fall air and a coat that smelled faintly of cedar from last winter. He greeted me with a hug that was firm but gentle, the kind that reassures without overwhelming. And then I saw him, the little boy, my grandson, standing just behind Marcus' knees, clutching a toy truck as if it were a lifeline. His eyes were bright and curious, unguarded in a way only children can be. And when he looked at me, I felt my heart expand in a way that surprised even me. "Hi, Grandma," he said shyly, but with the earnestness of someone who already knew he mattered. "Hi, sweetie," I replied, bending down to his level. I noticed his small hands and the way he tilted his head to study me, trying to read the unfamiliar face that in his own way had always been part of the family. Marcus watched me, a soft expression on his face, and I realized that this was part of the trust he had placed in me, the trust that I would be gentle, that I would not overwhelm, that I would be present without judgment. We walked along the park trail, the leaves crunching underfoot, and Marcus began sharing his hopes for his son. He spoke of wanting to teach him kindness, resilience, and the courage to make mistakes without fear. I listened and offered small reflections, stories of when he was young, moments he had missed, but that could still be shared. I told him about his first steps, the first time he had climbed the jungle gym at the playground, the sound of laughter that had filled our old house. His eyes softened and at times he laughed, the kind of laughter that comes from hearing something deeply familiar and longed for. There was a moment when the little boy ran ahead to chase a falling leaf, and I realized that the three of us were moving in a rhythm that was not forced, not planned but quietly organic. I looked at Marcus and saw the relief in his posture, the same relief I felt. It was as if we were discovering a new map of our relationship, one that honored the distance we had walked apart, but embraced the potential of proximity now. By late afternoon, we sat on a bench overlooking the small pond at the center of the park. Ducks paddled lazily across the water, and the sunlight shimmered in golden patches. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled up the envelope he had given me the night we met on the road. He handed me a new letter folded with careful precision. "I wanted you to have this," he said. I opened it slowly. Inside was a note that spoke of gratitude, growth, and hope, not in grandiose terms, but in the quiet way that made me ache with recognition. "Mom," he had written, "I want you to be part of our everyday, not just the milestones. I want our lives to overlap in ways that feel natural, in ways that bring joy rather than guilt or pressure." I read his words aloud softly, and then we folded the letter together, a small ritual of shared trust. He took my hand briefly, the warmth of his palm reminding me that this connection was now something tangible, something lived rather than imagined. The sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the park, and Marcus suggested we head home. We walked slowly, savoring the quiet of the evening, the air tinged with the scent of wet leaves and the faint promise of coming rain. His son skipped along, occasionally glancing back at me to make sure I was still with them, and in that glance I felt a wave of emotion. Relief, gratitude, love, all mingled into a single unmistakable current. Back at his apartment, Marcus made tea while his son played nearby. We talked about plans, small ones like weekly visits to the park, shared meals, and reading stories before bed. The conversation was easy, respectful, and warm, a contrast to the tense, unresolved dialogues of the past. It was the kind of dialogue that rebuilds trust, not through words alone, but through consistency, attention, and care. As evening fell and I prepared to leave, Marcus walked me to the door. His expression was calm but full of meaning. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "It means more than I can say." I squeezed his hand lightly, looking into his eyes. "Thank you for letting me in," I replied. "I think we're both learning how to be present now." Driving home, the night sky stretched wide and forgiving above me. The road was familiar yet transformed by the day's events. I realized that what had started as an unexpected meeting on a quiet country road had blossomed into something profound, a rediscovery of love, trust, and family. The echoes of his voice, the warmth of his hand, and the presence of his son filled me with a calm I had not known for years. By the time I reached my driveway, I understood that the journey had only begun. Rebuilding a relationship, healing old wounds, and forging new memories would take time. But that evening I felt a quiet certainty. The love between a mother and her child, once reopened with honesty and respect, has the power to carry us through any distance. The surprise on the road was more than a moment. It was the opening of a door, a beginning I would cherish every day. I placed the new letter alongside the photograph on my nightstand, the images and words a testament to what had been reclaimed. Sitting in the soft glow of my lamp, I reflected on the lessons of the day. Patience, presence, and the courage to reach out. Marcus' words still echoed in my soul. Yes, but now they were joined by the laughter of his child, the shared memories, and the quiet understanding that some surprises are not just fleeting moments. They are the foundation of something enduring. And as I drifted to sleep, I felt an unfamiliar but welcome peace. The kind that comes when you know that love once rediscovered can grow in ways that surprise you again and